You're listening to How India's Economy Works, hosted by journalist and author Puja Mehra.
Hello, I'm Puja Mehra. The Google search is free and makes life easy. But is it actually free? Do we have a full understanding of the hidden costs big tech companies impose on us? A business begins to be called big tech or big pharma or big tobacco not just because it's huge, but because of a sense of fear and mistrust hangs about it. Because it is so powerful that its power cannot be tamed by governments or market competition. A few days ago, the judge in a landmark antitrust case in the US has ruled that Google is a monopolist and it has acted illegally to maintain a monopoly in online search. This case is being seen as a turning point in the global quest to limit big tech's power and is expected to have repercussions in other cases where the Department of Justice and the states in the US have sued tech giants. For instance, in another case, the US Justice Department has argued that Apple makes it difficult once consumers buy it to ditch the iPhone. In separate cases, the Federal Trade Commission has sued Amazon, accusing it of squeezing sellers on its online marketplace. It has also sued Meta, accusing it of stamping out nascent competition. This US court's ruling is relevant here in India too, because the way tech giants run their businesses affects the way we shop, the way we consume information and search online. In fact, the first thing I did when I started my preparation for recording this podcast show is that I Googled the Google ruling. My guest on the show today is visiting professor at ICRIER, Payal Malik. Payal is a public policy economist. She was an economic advisor and the head of the economics division at the Competition Commission of India for 10 years, from 2012 to 2023. She has in this and other roles worked on regulation of digital markets. I asked Payal to help us understand the hidden costs of using seemingly free big tech products such as Google Search and of Indian tech companies that have been found by the Competition Commission of India to be dominant, such as Make My Trip. Payal, I want to start by asking you, why isn't big tech's power benign?
So this is a subject which is really very close to my heart. So there's been a lot of discussion, as you have just said in your opening remarks, that these big techs need to be reined, and this ruling in the American courts is very important because US till now hadn't taken up any action against quote unquote its own companies. Your question is, why isn't big tech power benign? This is a real confusion because technology and the technology which these big tech companies bring to the consumers, to other users, not just end consumers, but acting as intermediate between businesses and consumers, have really resulted in many demand side efficiencies and also made life simpler. Transactions very easy, search costs have been minimized. Consumers seem to be very, very happy because it's just ease of life. But what we did not realize, and I'm saying this now way back in 2012 when I was also at the commission, all these demand sides, consumer welfare arguments favored the economic framework which was analyzing the conduct of these big techs. Because if there is no consumer harm, consumers seem to be happy, then wherein lies the problem? In fact, in the initial days when the economists had started developing theories about the harm which can happen by the conduct of these big technology companies, it was taken with huge suspicion even by antitrust authorities and they just dismissed it as fancy theories of multi-sided markets. But what happened over the years was, it was clear that yes, in these multi-sided markets, there are two sides of the market. So one side is us, you, me, consuming various services through this intermediating platforms, because these businesses are platform centric. So be it Google, be it Amazon, be it Meta, and other companies also in India, which were startups to begin with, but have joined the big tech league, to give you the example of Make My Trip, etc. So what happened in the interim period was 9 years. It became very obvious that what these intermediate companies were doing in order to bring critical mass of consumers, they were squeezing the suppliers on the other side, be it the hoteliers, the retailers, people who sell products, people who are selling cell phones on these intermediary platforms. and also using huge amount of your data, that means your and mine data, which was being shared in these transactions, to get into adjacent markets and develop huge ecosystems of their products and services, such that consumers just could not move out of these ecosystems. For instance, if you are in a Google ecosystem or in an Android ecosystem, you will forcibly use Google search, you will forcibly use Google Maps, and that was taken as given. But this was at the cost of innovation in the follow up or in the user base of producers and service providers. And that's why this data usage and data extractivism to develop your own products, that is, the products into adjacent markets from your initial market. For instance, who could have thought that Google search would have been the basis in which the first driverless car of Google came on the block? So it was all because of the data which they had collected from their search engine. So this got into the psyche of antitrust enforcers, and in international cooperation setups, be it the ICN, the BRICS, the OECD, the harm these big tech were causing not only to these small businesses, but had an economy wide ramification, which could impact how economies progress, which could impact various other businesses, and therefore their conduct started to be seen through the lens of antitrust and regulation.
In fact, in this particular case, Google told the judge that Google is winning because it's better. People are searching on Google because Google is better than other search engines. But if Google is better, then why is it paying Apple and Samsung billions of dollars to make sure that it is the automatic search engine on their devices and web browsers? In fact, Google has been said to have paid $18 billion in 2021 to Apple to make sure that their search engine is the automatic default search engine on all Apple devices.
Yeah, so Pooja, you have just filtered the case very well. In fact, that was the question before Justice Amit Mehta, that if Google is indeed so good, then why does Google have to indulge in a practice which is known as monopoly maintenance? The most important, so just to understand what was Google doing, the most important way to distribute search engines was to have a preset default general search engine on a device. So all the distribution points, so be it your phones, and in this case, because in the US, iPhones are more important than the Android phones, which have a larger market share in India. So not only with Apple, in fact, the search giant had paid tens of billions of dollars a year to companies that distribute search. So all the distribution points were basically incentivized by Google through a payout. So be it Apple, be it LG, Motorola, Samsung, AT&T, T-Mobile, Mozilla. So these are now browsers. These are not even phone companies. Your web browsers on your laptop or on your desktop, to make sure that it was the only search engine that consumers saw. And Justice Mehta basically arrived at a conclusion, because Google's argument is defaults don't matter. And what strengthens Google's position in the search market is the fact that Google is the best. But Justice Mehta had looked at reams and reams of documents, which were internal documents of Google. And Justice Mehta came to a conclusion that by setting default, so defaults do matter, what Google has been able to do, that it has a major, largely unseen advantage over its rivals in all the distribution choke points.
So Google is building its power by spending billions of dollars, and it is spending these billions of dollars. It must be generating them somewhere. Are we being billed for it? We don't see it, but maybe these are hidden costs for us.
As the saying goes in economics, there is no free lunch. So, what happens in multi sided markets? These intermediaries like Google running the search platform wanted to create a critical mass of consumers so that the other side of its business, that is the ad monetized business, because when people go, and now Google has become synonymous with web search, when people go Google something, not only do they get results for what they are searching, but they also get sponsored advertisements related to their results. And those sponsored advertisements are the cash cow, so to speak, for Google. And why do the advertisers want to come to Google? Because Google has such curated data sets about our individual preferences, what we like, what we don't like, what we consume, how much we consume, that this data set is like a gold mine for targeted advertisements. Advertisers wanting to reach us do not have to have their ad companies doing a survey how to reach the right kind of customers, how to target your advertisements on the basis of the data which Google collects. It is able to, so for instance, you won't be surprised if you are, say, for instance, writing a Gmail to your friend saying, I will be in Sri Lanka, say, next month. And suddenly advertisements from Sri Lankan hotels start popping up on your mail account. So there is a quid pro quo. So no, nothing is free. We are giving our eyeballs, we are giving our data, and that data has been monetized for advertisements, and the advertisers are paying huge sums of money to Google for getting this service.
So, big tech firms are growing their power, using it to influence our consumption behavior and also profiting from it. This represents not only hidden costs for us, but we may be losing if they are monetizing our data. We may be losing out on that as well.
Yeah, so how the ad business works, that's the other side of the market. Say if the Google is intermediating between us and the advertisers, the advertisers are eager to come and place their ads on Google because Google has so many footfalls or traffic on it. Google search traffic is humongous. Just look at how the ecosystem has been created. First, set it as a default search engine, give it for free to the consumer side of the platform. So consumers access and have search at their fingertips, but extract their data and give that data to advertisers to be able to, or work as an ad tech company, not only give it the data to the advertisers, but help the advertisers on how to target their advertisements. So this way, what is being done is the advertisement side of the market has to come to Google in order to get any traction for its advertisements and returns on its advertisements. So Google and of course Meta, they have become in some sense just the two largest companies with online ads. So just in a very simple demand supply situation, if Google and Meta exercise power on the entire ecosystem of sellers in an economy for placing their ads, the advertisement prices will rise. If the advertisement prices rise, it is going to be, in the end, shifted to the consumer. The final consumer has to pay. So what seems to be free is not actually free.
Let's now talk about big tech in India. India is the first country in the developing world where strictures were passed against a few tech giants. What was all of that about?
So just quickly on the process of what happens in a antitrust proceeding. So there is some information filed. So the information goes for investigation. If the commission forms a prima facie view that there is something to be investigated as the conduct at a prima facie level, that is initial level or initial vetting, seems to be anti-competitive. After the Director General of Investigation investigates a matter and sends it to the commission deliberates, the commission adjudicates, carries out hearings, and comes out with final orders. So this is the administrative mechanism of how competition authority in India works. It is different in the US. As we saw in US, the DOJ and the FTC have to take their cases to the courts. So between 2020 and I think it's close to the pandemic, but prior to that also, from 2017 onwards, many cases were filed in CCI pointing out to the conduct of these big tech companies and pointing out to the fact that these conducts are anti-competitive. It was only in 2022 October that through a slew of orders, the Competition Commission of India, or the CCI, showed a red card to digital companies for not playing fair in the market. So there were two cases against Google. One was a case which was similar to the case which now has come to some finality in the US, in the Washington district courts, though this will also be appealed, was about default presetting and also a lot about Google bundling its applications, that is, its Google Search, Google Mail, Google Maps, etc., with its Play Store when an Android operating system is used by a phone manufacturing company. So that is, I think, in lying in appeal with the Supreme Court of India. There was another case against Google that was regarding its rules to govern the applications that are dependent on its Play Store and the mandatory using of the Google billing system, and which included also a hefty commission of 30% on each and every transaction of certain digital apps, not only for the downloading of those apps for visibility on the Google Play Store, but if any in-app purchase was made, the, the digital app and hence the consumer had to pay 30% commission to Google. That were the two cases against Google. And the third case, and that's what I had mentioned, was against Make My Trip. And Make My Trip, there was, again, the case was brought up by the Federation of Hotels and Restaurant Associations of India. And Make My Trip was accused of, and Commission did find the allegations and determined an antitrust contravention, was accused of providing substantial discounts on hotel rooms. And that's where the problem lies. Discounts are very good for the consumer. So then what were the problem? It's not just the discounts, but it was an ecosystem which was created through the discounts through exclusive relationship with certain hotels and certain franchisees, such as Oyo. That is, if Oyo was providing its inventory on Make My Trip, its competitors, Tribo, could not provide its inventory on Make My Trip. Then discounts which were funded by the commissions it was receiving from other hotels, and also some kind of a parity requirement. It's a bit technical, but if Make My Trip did not allow hoteliers to give hotel rooms, or the right of first refusal was with Make My Trip, and so therefore it had to give at least the same set of hotel rooms to Make My Trip as to Make My Trip's competitors. So this made sure that Make My Trip would not allow other competitors to enter in the space for matching of hotels and consumers. And the pinch was being felt by the hoteliers because they saw that their inventory was sold at so much of a discount, and the discount was being funded by the commissions which these hoteliers had to pay to Make My Trip for visibility. So these were the three major orders. There are several other investigations in the pipeline. One against Apple. Again, its Play Store, App Store policies are under investigation. One case which was started by the commission was about the WhatsApp's privacy policy. If you remember, a few years ago, there was a privacy policy announced by WhatsApp, which was basically a take it or a leave it kind of a arrangement. That was taken up both under the abuse of dominance provisions of the commission. And recently, the alternate billing system, which has been brought into place as a consequence of the commission's initial order, is also under investigation for being exploitative, for being discriminatory and arbitrary and non-transparent when it comes to the commission, 30% commissions which are being charged by a subset of apps on the Play Store.
I want to understand, and I'm sure listeners would want to understand, in the Make My Trip case, how were consumers losing out? And how exactly were hotel owners losing out? Was Make My Trip building its revenues at the cost of consumers and hotel owners? Is that what was happening?
It's slightly nuanced, but the point was the price discovery. So you as a consumer the hotel price which you were paying, there was no way to benchmark it against an alternate platform, because Make My Trip had made it appear that, first of all, it did give discounts to the consumers, but you do not know whether the discounted price is still a competitive price, because the discounted price could also be a price which is a monopoly price. So you may be paying 500 rupees for a hotel room, just to give you an instance, with discount. And you may feel, oh, if the room was for 600, I got a 100 rupee discount and you're happy. But you do not know the actual price of the hotel room. It could be 400 and 450 also. The reason you did not know, because of exclusivity agreements. So, for instance, certain franchisees were told and had to show all their inventory only on Make My Trip. The largest franchisee, which was OYO, a hotel franchisee chain, and the other competitors, say ClearTrip, etc., or Booking.com, etc., could not carry that inventory. So if they cannot carry that inventory, the price discovery process was very weak. Second, the commissions which were taken from the hoteliers. So again, there could be a monopoly element there also. Because the hoteliers do not have an alternate, even if they have alternate, they have to keep their inventory on Make My Trip, because Make My Trip was the largest platform connecting the hoteliers and the consumers. Then in that case, the commission which they pay is not subject to competition. And think of another instance where a new platform like Make My Trip wants to enter, it could not compete on the basis of commissions. The reason being, the hotels were not allowed, because of their exclusivity contracts, to move to the other platform. And also, the hotels had to provide all their inventory. So there was a what is known as room parity to Make My Trip.
I know this is going to require you to repeat your arguments again, but because this is slightly, these are new terms and new concepts for listeners who are not trained in economics. So I want to again ask this question, but saying that, if I use Google or if I use Make My Trip and I say that my life is made easier by Googling, or my life is made easier by using Make My Trip, I don't mind paying 500 rupees for a room that would have charged me 450 if there was a competitive market. Why would I be wrong in making this argument? Is what I'm losing only 50 rupees, or is there something more to it? Or when Google doesn't charge me for a search and becomes my default search option, in what ways am I losing that I should care for? If it is just a small loss that I don't care for, then why is all this so important?
So I'll take these two things separately. Let's go back to Google first. So Google is giving me definitely free search. So there is a demand side efficiency. And that, as I said, that goes without saying. Because if I have to search anything now on the web, I have this search engine which gives me so much of information. And due to network effects, it has got refined the information so much that clearly that information is good. All right. But the question which was being adjudicated in Justice Mehta's court was, it was a chicken and egg problem. Were you good to begin with? Or did you become good because you monopolized the market? So you needed that data and you monopolized the market. You monopolized the market by, exactly speaking, paying bribes to these phone companies. You bribed these phone companies, please set me as a default search engine. So the harm that the consumers were facing was that unwillingly or not knowingly, or even for that matter, willingly, and that's where the nuance comes, they were parting away with their data, and their data, they were losing control of their data. So that data, which is, they are the data principles, that data means they lose that control, and Google becomes the owner of your data without any defined property rights.
And it's important because this prevents more Googles from coming up. And by locking myself into Google and my data with Google, I am closing myself against the possibility that many, many, much, much better Googles would come up in future.
Absolutely. You're closing to that possibility. Second, as I said, you're concentrating data in the hands of a single private entity. That data, they have been able to create property rights without any well defined property rights. No one gave Google the property rights on the data which was being transacted on the search engine. Similarly, no one gives Amazon the right on the data which is generated from when I'm buying something and the seller is selling something. But just because they happen to be intermediating, they just usurp that data. And data is really, I don't want to use the cliche. I don't think it's because in economics term, it is not the new oil. But yes, data is an input. It's a modular input, as they say. So it's an input which can go not only in one industry, but in multiple industries. So similarly, data can go in not only in one service, but in many, many adjacent services. As I said, Google Maps, Google Cars, etc., etc. So that means you're not only closing the market for other companies, which could be competitors to Google in search, you're also closing competition for other companies in other services, which could have been competitors for Google search. The biggest grouse in India has been by Map My India. And Map My India is an Indian map service, online map service, saying precisely that the bundling of maps, because if you buy a Google Android phone, you would have Google Maps. So, and the logic is the same. You will have Google Maps already preset in that. You do not have Map My India preset in that. So one argument Google also makes, and some other detractors to this kind of thinking make, they said Map My India or other people could have also bid to make their search or maps as the default setting. But Google did that because it had deep pockets to begin with. Others may not be able to compete in order to put their product on the Google platform. And so, therefore, this argument has been dismissed by this current ruling as well. Now, coming back to your Make My Trip. Make My Trip is saying that the activities and the conduct of Make My Trip was such that you cannot get another competing platform which could sell. So your life becomes simpler whether you go on Make My Trip or you go on Make My Clear Trip. So what I'm saying is there is no inter-platform competition, so to speak. So the whole ecosystem is created, be it through discounts, through exclusivity, through price parity. What is price parity? Make My Trip says to its hotel partners that if you're selling on my platform, and it is a dominant entity which is saying, if you're selling on my platform for 500 rupees, you cannot sell it at 450 rupees on a competing platform. So those conducts means basically there is no price discovery. You don't even know whether 450 is the actual price of the room. And you see that price discovery happening when you are buying these airline tickets. The airline tickets, there is a kind of, because this kind of an arrangement is not there between Make My Trip and airlines. So Make My Trip is just doing an intermediating service. Of course, it being a dominant entity exploits its customer by some hidden cost, because at the end of it, when you are checking out, you'll have multiple charges put against the airfare. So you do not know what you're going to pay because the price for the airline which is shown is not the final price you pay. So that's a separate issue. So the airline tickets, you see that there is a real-time price changes and you compare prices across airlines for a given route. That possibility is not available by the conduct or by the ecosystem which Make My Trip has created in the case of hotels. Yeah.
There is a global debate, and I want to know from you how we talk about and think about these things in India. And the global debate is on whether the regulations and regulators that exist for dealing with digital markets, such as the ones that we've been talking about, are sufficient, or if new provisions are needed or new regulating entities are needed. And in India, like you explained, we've already had rulings from the Competition Commission of India for sort of reining in the power of some of these digital market entities. But how is the debate in India? Is our regulation and our regulating entities, are they sufficient, or do we need new laws? What's the status in India?
Yeah, so just like in other jurisdictions, India, as you may know, has been discussing a new law known as the Digital Competition Bill. That Digital Competition Bill was a consequence of various things. So, two things. While CCI was looking at these individual case by case informations which were being filed, sending it for investigation, adjudicating, taking out final orders. But the case by case competition law, despite for the fact that it does allow for a very, very nuanced look at a case by case approach to competition problems, was a very long route for regulatory mediation and market correction. Why do we have a competition authority? We have a competition authority such that it is able to, through its judgments, correct the market. If you look at all the writings which have happened after the Google order in the US, top headlines are saying web search, if this goes through, and because they are also going to appeal in the Supreme Court of the United States, would change the way web search happens. But it's a very, very, as I said, long route for regulatory mediation and market correction. And given that these markets are very important in a digital economy, given our economy is increasingly being digitalized, as you know, the State of the Indian Digital Economy report taken out by the Credit Process Center has shown that India is the third digitalized country, and going forward, almost 20% of the Indian economy would be digitalized. So we want that conduct, at least the regulators, the policymakers would want that the conduct of major players who are now called gatekeepers, so to speak, in the jargon which has been coined by the European Union, behave in a certain way or have got rules of engagement. And those rules of engagement are nothing else but whatever has come out in these cases in the last 10, 15 years. So what has been seen is that these big tech engage in activities such as deep discounting, such as unfair dealing with the business partners or the business side of the platform. There is a bargaining power imbalance between the business users of the platform, say, for instance, on an Amazon, the small retailers who are trying to place the products to sell on Amazon do not have so much of bargaining power against an Amazon, and Amazon sets all the rules of engagements. And there's a huge dependence. So again, it's not that we have to do away with these platform centric markets because there is a huge dependency and because they are a conduit for many businesses to deal with their own consumers and their customers. Increasingly, it was thought once these anti competitive conducts are known, things like self referencing, leveraging, data collecting processes, the rules of engagement should be given by the legislator, not by a private actor, that is a Google or an Amazon or a Make, because it is the precisely the referee role that has been the subject matter of the information. The referee means Google becomes a referee. So to give another example, and that case is still under investigation and it may resonate with you being a journalist, that there are these snippets, news media snippets, which now what is happening is Google is collecting that news information from various news publishing houses and bringing out its own snippets known as Google snippets with top news of the day. And a lot of behavioral economics has now got into this. Given the behavior of the consumer who wants things at fingertips and very fast, is just going to these snippets. And snippets have been created through material, through the hard work of journalists like you who are publishing in the old fashioned news media. And they are being sold or they are being shown as Google snippets. And the publishers, that is the news media houses, are losing out on ad revenues in the digital space because otherwise they used to make money from a lot of footfalls, say a footfall on a Times of India, Mint, or the Hindustan Times digital newspaper gave them a lot of advertisement revenue. Now they have been starved of that advertisement revenue, and a lot of now media are shifting to the digital medium. The starving of the advertisement revenue means, and so therefore there is an economy-wide ramification, means that you cannot invest in investigative journalism, you can't invest in news, and that will have an impact, a larger impact on the kind of quality of news which comes up. So therefore, it's very important that this intermediation is also taken into account, though there are different laws. Australia has come out with a different law which protects the publishing houses against this kind of crawling of your news and creating of snippets. And there's a bargaining code now being established where Google bargains, Google and Meta engage with these news publishers and share advertisement revenues. So that's also kind of a new law, an ex ante law, because though this information has come to the competition authority, but as I said, by the time it reaches its finality, it's going to be too late and too little. So therefore, the digital competition law, and though it does not cover news publishers, but it does cover the relationships, say, of intermediary like Google or Amazon, qua the users from the business sides, on how do they deal with them, how is the data used, whether or not they wouldn't be able to self-prefer, meaning what? Amazon cannot now collect the transaction data between me as a consumer and the seller and bring out its own products and set up algorithms which throw up results, Amazon results prior to or before organic results, thereby distorting choice. So there were so many distortions happening because of the rules of governance put in place by gatekeepers, and given the dependencies, that it was thought that why not codify these rules which have come out through the competition into some kind of a legislation. Now, what form and shape they take, whether it should be cutting across all these core digital services, or you can deal with one pressing problem through a specific law. For instance, recently, Japan has brought up what is known as a smartphone act, which governs how Google, using the Android operating system in smartphones, and how Apple behaves and relates to the users. And when I'm saying users, it's not the end consumers, but to the users on their app store. So they have regulated the commission as well. And Korea had many years ago regulated the fact that consumers should be allowed, or the application providers should be allowed to provide alternate billing systems rather than just the Google Play billing system. So, what shape and form they will take, it does require a lot of discussions. But what is becoming clearer, that is for a set of known practices, a case by case assessment may not still be necessary. So you need not go, for instance, what Apple is doing in its App Store and what Google is doing with its Play Store. And it is known, at least in one ecosystem, that that practice has been anti-competitive. What's the point of carrying out a long drawn out investigation subject to appeals, be it in NCLAT or the Supreme Court? So since these competitions should be restored quickly, it is better that they are governed by a certain set of rules rather than case by case approach, which is embedded in the competition law process, which is very, very process intense. So India, as you know, 12th of March, the digital competition report came out. There is a bill. It is being debated. So let's see how does it pan out in the future, and whether India would bring out a DMA kind of law which governs these big tech, or take some other shape and form. That's a question which we know only in the future.
We are out of time, but I have to ask you one last question very quickly, which is that, the RBI is considered a very powerful regulator. We saw what it did with the Paytm Bank. So to regulate the power of big tech, do we also need a more powerful regulator than Competition Commission of India?
So as I mentioned, that the regulations or the obligations for these big tech, which have been identified in the digital competition law, are emanating all from the anti-competitive conduct which has been observed in the past few years. So in that sense, administratively, Competition Commission of India is the authority which is equipped, has the intellectual capacity, and has the right kind of, because as a part of being an Indian competition authority, it is networked with the International Competition Network, with BRICS, with other organizations such as this. And there is a lot of, because these are global companies, there's a lot of mutual learning which has happened over the years. So competition authority will be the right authority, but it does need more capacity. And when I'm saying capacity, just sheer manpower, because this would be akin to an RBI kind of a process where you have to do continuous monitoring and looking at infringements on a continuous basis and coming out with pronouncements. So, though it would be the competition authority, and that is the question which is being asked again and again, is the Indian Competition Authority has sufficient manpower capacity? And I'm qualifying it because there are some stakeholders who confuse it with technical capacity. So the technical capacity is there, but that technical capacity has to be augmented with manpower capacity. And give the kind of resources, because I think RBI has its own sources of funds. Competition Commission has some sources of funds through its M&A filings, but they are not sufficient. A lot of money would be required, a lot of resources would be required. And yes, that would become one of the points in deciding whether or not ex-ante rules of a broad encompassing kind need to be executed, or just some specific law, say regarding the app stores, be brought out the way Japan has done or way Korea has done.
RBI has a staff strength of 13,500 employees. How much is it at CCI?
Pathetic. So it feels so bad. Less than 100 professionals.
Including investigators.
Including investigators, actually, come to think of it. Yeah.
Such a large economy, that's definitely less. And resources should not be the constraint because the penalties are hefty, aren't they? Does it get to keep them?
So right now, CCI doesn't. It goes to the Consolidated Fund of India. So yes, some percentage of penalties can be a source of revenue. I'm so glad that you're the only one who is saying this and who has thought through this, that constraint of resources should not be something which should avoid the policymaker to put a right legislation in place. Okay, resources should never be a constraint. So there are various ways and means. The proportion of the penalties, hefty penalties, 10% of the global turnover now. If you are contravening certain provisions of this digital competition law, then the penalty is 10% of the global turnover. So yeah, if being an economist, if money is on the table, these things can be dealt with very easily.
Great. Thanks, Payal.
Thank you so much, Puja. It was real fun. Thanks.
Google will, of course, appeal the ruling, but there's a lot of speculation around the world that as a remedy for its monopoly, the judge may ask for Google to be broken up into smaller companies. More than 100 years ago, something similar was done in the US for Standard Oil, which was broken into 43 separate companies. But there's also the case of Microsoft. In the 1990s, an antitrust ruling had called for Microsoft to be broken up. Microsoft appealed that ruling and settled with the administration of President George Bush in 2001.
You've been listening to How India's Economy Works, hosted by journalist and author Puja Mehra. Do stay connected with more of our coverage at the core. You can check out our website or sign up to our newsletter at www.thecore.in. That is www.thecore.in. Do also track us on LinkedIn, where we usually post synopses or extracts of our top stories and interviews. We would love your feedback, so do write to us at feedback@thecore.in. Thank you for listening.